today I'm going to be talking about a fairy tale retelling based on Rumplestiltskin called Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. And I have been racking my brain as to how to talk about this book because I don't want to do it a disservice, but I thought it didn't meet its potential. It was beautifully written, and when she actually followed the fairy tale and the story, I thought it was really great. But she sort of delved into literary fiction aspects, and for me, it drags the story down and loses momentum. But before I really get into that, I'm going to give you a bare bones synopsis, or maybe not even a synopsis. I know I tell you I'm going to give you the gist of a story, and then I end up giving you all these details. But this time, as I said, it can get real literary fiction-y, and so there's so many intricacies that we cannot go down those rabbit holes. The thing is, I told you it's Rumplestiltskin, and it follows three main point of views. Eventually, she starts adding in all these other ones, and that's when I feel like she gets a little too heavy and she just drags it out too much. But the three main characters are Miriam, Irina, and Wendy. So Miriam is the daughter of a Jewish moneylender, but he's really bad at his job. So she sees that they are poor and that the townspeople make fun of them, so she takes over his business and does really well at it. But, obviously everybody starts to hate her, and even her mother isn't happy with her, doesn't like what she's doing. And so one day she boasts to her mother about how good she is at this job and how she can turn silver into gold. And unbeknownst to her, she is heard by the Sterek King. Now, the Sterek are this, magical, mythical kind of ice people, and they're feared. So eventually the Sterek King, he starts dropping off money for her to change into gold. See, the Rumpelstiltskin thing? He drops off his Sterek silver for her to change into gold, and she can either do it or she can die. And then she's like, well, what do I get in the end? And he's like, well, you can be my queen. Neither one wants it, but for some reason, that's his code of ethics. Anyways, so there's Miriam. And then there's Irina, who is the daughter of a duke, and in order for Miriam to change the silver into gold, she has it melted down and made into jewelry, and the jewelry is then sold to Irina's father, who pays them in gold. And his purpose in using it is to get her wed to the Tsar, because this is like a Russian-esque setting. Then the Tsar, though, as handsome as he is rumored to be a wizard. Evil wizard. What turns out is that he's inhabited by a fire demon. So now we have Miriam, who's married off to this evil Sterek King, and we have Irina, who's married off to a demon-inhabited Tsar, and then we have Wendy, who has no real storyline. She does not add to the plot in the way that Miriam and Irina do, but she is a poor peasant, and her father, who's incredibly abusive, owes money to Miriam's father. And Miriam, as she takes over the business, she's like, well, if you can't pay, then I'll take her as my servant. And it's really not as bad as you think, because Wendy's home life is not that great, and she enters into Miriam's home, and she's fed, she is loved, she finds what she doesn't have at home. What she really does is kind of add outside perspective whenever Miriam's not around, although we could have done without her, because the thing about the Sterek is they can make you forget. So once Miriam marries, basically nobody remembers her or her existence. And so in order to keep up with her family, we have Wendy and Wendy's brothers, although then all this other stuff happens and Wendy kind of disappears and her brother becomes the perspective character. As I said, too many intricacies. But that's the main thing, is we have these three women, two have bad relationships, and then they end up saying, we know how to solve the problem, and that is have, my fire demon inhabited husband destroy your, not evil inhabited, but your evil ice king husband. And, things go awry and all this, that, the other, and then eventually everything turns out hunky-dory, and the husbands are no longer evil, and we're done. So yeah, it's kind of an exciting plot, but it really gets dragged down because of all the other stuff that Novik includes. She sort of makes up for it because it's so well written. Like, her world building is gorgeous, and so you kind of forget that nothing's happening. That we have a whole chapter of Miriam's parents on a sleigh ride through the woods. That's not for me. Maybe it is for you. Not for me. Now we have that out of the way. Let's talk about my initial impression of the book. I don't know if it's something about me and my taste level, but I keep picking up books with prologues, which I don't necessarily have anything against a prologue, but, you know, it's like eating a sandwich for lunch every day. Eventually you just get tired of it. And so I'm just ready to find a book that opens with the first chapter. This one, you know, it's not that it was a bad prologue. It was essentially saying, you've heard the story of Rumplestiltskin and the girl who had to turn straw into gold, but you don't know the real story. I'm going to tell you. But I was like, you know, if we cut that out, I don't think I would have missed anything. It was slightly intriguing because you do wonder, well, what's the true story? But you know what? I knew going into this fairy tale retelling that it was going to be a story different from what I'd grown up hearing, which, you know, I think what drew me to this book most was Rumpelstiltskin is not The Little Mermaid. It's not Beauty and the Beast. It's not Cinderella. It's not one that's done over and over and over. So I really wanted to see what this author was going to do with this story. We have this prologue that I could give or take. It did not make me, you know, want to turn the book off. So then we go into the first chapter, which is of Miriam basically saying, I'm fed up with my poor lifestyle. Like, if my dad's not going to do it, I will do it for him. And so it's her showing this determination and picking up and doing what needs to be done, which I like. She's a strong female character. But then you go into Wendy, and it's like, you know, I'm like, well, what is it with really strong first chapters that then lead into kind of extraneous second chapters? And the problem with the audiobook is the narrator did a fantastic job. She really did. But it was hard to distinguish between the females because, you know, there were nuances in the way that the narrator did each voice, but not enough for me to immediately pick up on the fact that it was a new character. And so I'd get a couple paragraphs in, and I'm like, hold on a second, who is this? It continued throughout the whole book, and I felt like it got worse towards the end, which, if you're actually reading the book, won't be a problem for you because you can see the paragraph delineations. But if you're listening to it, you're going to have to pay close attention to realize that you are in a new perspective, because there is no, okay, now this is Wendy. Okay, now this is Irina. Okay, now we're back to Miriam. None of that. And then when she starts adding in Wendy's younger brother or Irina's caretaker, or even, you know, when they have Irina's husband, like, these are not young women anymore. And so it's like, hold on a second, this is completely different. I'm lost. Anyways, so that just goes into the flow for an audiobook of one POV into another where I just was lost. And I sort of could pick up on it because I was like, this is not nearly as interesting, not as engaging. The beginning I thought was really slow because we go back and forth between these two characters, and I found Miriam much more engaging because I liked to see how she did not care. Like, she knew her family was owed and that her family could do better and that her mother was sick and she needed to take care of her family. So she was gonna get the money. You know what I'm saying? Show me the money. She's like 16 years old and she has no shame, which is amazing. Like, I loved seeing that she knew what needed to be done. But eventually, I needed more. Like, there's only so much of, I'm going to collect on these balances versus Wendy's, oh, you know, my father beat me. I have no love for my brothers. My mother is dead and now I have to, you know, work all day for a family. Like, that's just... you don't need a whole lot of that before you get bored. It really did not start picking up for me until the Starrett King dropped off the first batch of silver, because then there's something at stake. So Miriam goes to like the big village, not even a village, like the township where the Duke lives, and has it melted down into a ring, and and then the next batch comes, and she has that melted down into a necklace, and then the last one comes, and she has that made into a crown, and you're just wanting to see, is she going to get it done? Which, if it's following true to the original story, she will, but how? And then, why? Like, why is it the Duke keeps buying this Starrett silver made jewelry? So then, they kind of put in like one chapter of Irina, and she's like, wow, my dad's got this mesmerizing ring, but I want it. I want to look at it closely, but he's always wearing it. So it's kind of like, do I really need this chapter? Not really, but I guess maybe it's just introducing her because she becomes a major player later. Yeah, and so the book has picked up, and now we find out, well, the Duke is trying to marry off his daughter, and she's not really attractive, but I guess the Starrett silver kind of enchanting, maybe can cast a bit of a glamour, so you forget what she looks like or who she is because you're just mesmerized by whatever aura this Starrett silver made jewelry is emitting. She doesn't want to marry the Tsar, as I said, because he's evil, but there's really nothing she can do about it. But what I really like is that she sees what's going on. She's not just like, oh, I'm gonna be a Tsarina. Like, she knows her father's ulterior motives. She knows the Tsar is not someone that, despite how handsome he is not a good catch. This is not going to turn out well for her. She's a very intelligent young woman. And then, on their wedding night, she's like, I'm in danger. How can I escape? And wearing her jewelry, as well as the fact that she has some Starrett blood, she's able to escape through any reflective surface, she finds out. So yeah, she escapes from him, and she's watching him, and it's interesting / irritating because she keeps coming back. For me, if I were in a dangerous marriage, I would get out of Dodge. Like, if I'm able to escape him through a mirror, I will keep walking. I'm not going to sit there and watch him tear apart a room, speak to the demon in the fireplace, magically put everything back together, and then come back the next morning. Not going to happen. But she does, and then she realizes that she needs to rescue her old caregiver, Margareta? Anyways. So then it's kind of like, well, how is she going to do that? So it does keep propelling. Like, the storyline does keep me engaged up until Miriam and Irina are both married. Because then there is less focus on them and more focus on events happening outside of them, which do come back to tie in. But I'm like, I have connected with these characters because also at this point, Wendy, her father, has tried to marry her off to someone for liquor. And then he gets upset because she says no, and he ends up dying, accidentally dying. So she and her older brother flee, and she sends her younger brother, who ends up being a POV character, to go stay with Miriam's family. And I guess because they can't really carry 3 people around, and maybe she also thinks that he'll get better care and maybe fill in for her with Miriam's family. So she's gone. Irina and Miriam are kind of gone. So now I'm like, why am I still invested when the people you've introduced me to, the people who are propelling the story, are not part of the story anymore? So the Starrett King has brought Miriam to his kingdom, and he's pretty abusive, like neglectful, mean, and then what is it? I think she goes on like a cross-country sleigh ride because she wants to get out. And she runs across Irina and her Margreta, I think that's her name. I'm not going to correct myself if I'm wrong because I really don't care. They concoct this plan, but she cannot go back through with Irina for one reason or another. I don't know, because I started skipping ahead. Anyway, she can't go through even wearing the jewelry, and so she realizes the only way to get back to her world is via the Starret King. Her cousin is going to get married, and so she's like, well, maybe I can bargain for that because I told them I would be there before the last dance. So this is kind of going back to Rumplestiltskin, where the Starret King is like, well, I have 3 vaults full of silver. You need to turn it all to gold. So I'm like, okay, well, this is interesting now. You know, there's a goal and there's something at stake. So what's going to happen? And what happens? Somehow through all of this, again, I started fast forwarding. So I think it got interesting like a third of the way through the novel, and then maybe right after the halfway point, it got boring again, which is strange because usually that middle section is where the author loses you. But for some reason, that's kind of where she had the most momentum for me. Throughout this, she learns that the whole reason that he wants all the silver turned to gold is because it helps him to capture the warmth of the other world, and it can always be winter, which is bad because if it's always winter, you can't grow, you can't eat, you die. So she's like, well, I can't have that, which is why she teams up with Irina. I guess more so than the fact that she doesn't like him because he's not a very nice guy, but she's just like, well, I gotta save my family. I have to save my village, which is great. You know, that's noble. But she ends up, I don't know how. I mean, I think she did the first storeroom, and she's like 3 days, right? So I think she did the first storeroom, and then she got to the second one, which is, of course, bigger, and she's like, this is not gonna work. So she enlists the help of some other people to kind of empty out the third storeroom, because the deal was whatever's in the storeroom has to be turned to gold, because in the Starret Kingdom, she can turn things to gold by the touch. Anyways, by kind of knocking out a third of her work, she is able to go to the wedding. Honestly, there's just nothing at this point that I found interesting. So I know eventually the girls, Irina and Miriam, I think Miriam kind of double crosses Irina because and this is I only know this because I Googled the plot. Miriam, I guess, sees something good in the Starret King and she does not want him destroyed. So Irina, in retaliation, just brings the demon to the Starret Kingdom and lets him loose. Miriam comes, she saves everybody, and as I said, both the Starret King and the Tsar turn good and happily ever after. Which, I mean, even at that point, I don't feel like the story picked up. It was exciting to see Miriam save everybody, but there was a lot, like, there was a point, which, again, if you're reading the book, you're not going to get as confused. At least, I hope you don't. Like, she should be doing paragraph breaks that you can tell there's a different perspective. So, early on in the novel, Wendy's mother has died, and she has been planted underneath this white tree. And anything white, like pure white, in the kingdom belongs to the Starret King. Well, this tree has never bloomed, never blossomed, never produced fruit, but they're not allowed to cut it down because it belongs to the Starret King. But they buried their mother and all these dead babies, like stillborns, underneath this tree. And so when they are leaving, when Wendy and her brothers are leaving after the father has died, they go and they visit the mother, and the tree gives them this nut. And the youngest brother keeps it with him. Then, and I'm so confused about POVs at this point, but I think we're with Irina, and she has gone through a reflective surface and ends up in a forest, or like, instead of, I don't know, she finds like a knot in a tree or something, meets somebody else's hand, no, no, I don't know. It's so confusing. Anyways, she goes through this reflective surface, and I think she ends up in the woods. And for some reason, she's like, there's something underneath the snow. So she starts digging. And she comes up with this nut. And then we're at a completely new perspective, which turns out to be Miriam's perspective. The Stark King is dying for XYZ reasons, and they're trying to figure out a way to get him back to the Stark Kingdom. So they're tearing apart this house, because he's like, there's something of my kingdom here. The brother pulls out the nut, and for whatever Stark rules there are, the Stark King cannot take the nut. So Miriam takes the nut, and she's like, I know what to do with the nut. I'm gonna send it through this basin out back. So she sticks her hand through there, and her hand meets Irina's hand, so then Irina has the nut. So it's not even in sequence, which is another huge issue of mine. I said it before, and I will continue to say it, because no matter how I felt in the beginning of my writing career, the more I see it in books, the more I agree, do not go back and forth in time. Like, continue the progression of your story, alright? Like, unless you're doing flashbacks of some sort, you cannot keep going back and forth, because as I'm saying right now, I was so confused. I figured the nut somehow had to do with Wendy's brother, because there was a point made of them receiving this nut, but I had no clue what was happening. And so it's kind of like that, where she just starts going back and forth and doing things, and I'm like, what in the world is happening? And this is all, in the latter, fourth of the book. I had known, because of my research, that the two girls were going to align themselves in order to, I guess, get rid of their husbands or save their husbands or rid their husbands of whatever. But I could not find that one place where, all right, now we're joining forces. And then I could not find that place where they went their separate ways. And I was just like, I mean, granted, if I just listened to it the whole way through, I would have found those places. But who likes to read a book they're bored with? Not me. I like to fast forward to the exciting parts. So I was just like, there's no definitive moments. I cannot find these definitive moments. So what is there for me to say? What is there to keep me going, to want me to say good things about this book? I feel terrible, because all these other reviewers have loved this novel. And maybe it's because they did read it, whereas I listened to it. But you can't combat boring. You can't combat a slow plot. You can't combat too many POVs. You can't go halfway through a book and then add a new perspective, and you just can't do it, because someone is gonna say, what? Where did this person come from? And why are they necessary? Did I need to know about Margreta's learning how to weave? No, I did not. So it was, I guess, overwhelming in that sense that you get from a literary novel, where there's just all these little intricacies, and you don't feel like it's really plot driven, it's more character driven. What everybody had right was that it was beautifully written. I mean, yes, it was well written, but I mean, her setting, you could see it, you could feel it, it was real, and it was gorgeous. Her characters, so layered. Even though I didn't like all of them, and even though I was like, why is Margreta giving me perspective, I still connected with her. And I think that's an indication of a good writer, is that you can make every character relatable, necessary, no matter how big or small their part is. Now that my rant is over,